It'd be helpful if you stop me if you want to discuss something, you don't understand something. And I won't let the conversation get carried away, but I do encourage you to just stop me. We have lots of time. It's maybe like a 30, 40-minute talk, so there's lots of time to stop and wait. So there's been a lot of excitement over AI of late, with some enthusiasts claiming that it's just a matter of time before the current generation of AI morphs into artificial general intelligence, at which point we should concede that the AI system is, for all intents and purposes, sentient or even conscious. Some go further, declaring that we are on the verge of an AI singularity in which AI intelligence will leapfrog that of humans, ushering in, for better or worse, a new age. But there are reasons, historical, technical, and philosophical, to be cautious about such claims. So let's start with a bit of a historical perspective. It's notoriously challenging to extrapolate into the future on the basis of current scientific and technological advancements, as the import of such achievements may turn out to be exaggerated. So think, for example, of the hype surrounding the Miller-Urey experiments in the early 1950s, experiments that seem to corroborate the heterotropic or primordial theory of the origin of life. I don't know if this made a big splash in Taiwan as it did in America or Canada. So this theory, which actually dates back to the 1920s, holds that living organisms evolved on Earth a few billion years ago, emerging naturally from the inorganic compounds that made up Earth's prebiotic atmosphere. And in 1953, Stanley Miller, under the supervision of his advisor, Harold Urey, created a mixture of such compounds: methane, ammonia, carbon dioxide, hydrogen, and water vapor. Put them all into a kind of bell with some water on the bottom. He zapped it with an electric arc, simulating a lightning strike. And the experiment produced monomers, including basic amino acids that are essential to life as we know it. And these findings garnered considerable media attention. And if you believe the press coverage, but the excitement proved premature. So our understanding of molecular biology has increased exponentially since that time, and later variants of the Miller-Urey experiment produced an ever greater array of organic molecules. They continue to do variations on this experiment. Yet today, some 70 years after the original experiment, scientists are arguably no closer to synthesizing a living entity. We still seem to be missing something. Indeed, the failure to produce primitive life forms in the lab motivates many of the alternatives to abiogenic theories, from facile creationist accounts to more sober panspermia theories, which hold that life on Earth was seeded from extraterrestrial sources. That's a theory that is taken very seriously by biologists. Now, I mentioned the primordial soup hypothesis and the misplaced optimism surrounding the Miller-Urey experiment, as it seems immediately relevant to discussions of AI. The claim in both cases is that the science provides an eminently naturalistic account of the emergence of sentient beings. But if we broaden our purview beyond questions of the origin of life and the nature of consciousness, there are countless other examples of scientific advances that failed to deliver on their early promise. So think of string theory, which promised to unify general relativity and quantum mechanics. When the foundations of string theory were formulated some 50 years ago, pundits felt that we were on the cusp of another scientific revolution, and universities around the world vied with one another to hire specialists in the subject so as not to miss out on the action. But despite the concerted efforts of 2 generations of scientists and thousands of published books and articles, string theory failed to deliver, both conceptually and experimentally. And it is quickly falling out of fashion. Physics departments are filled with string theorists that we don't know what to do with them now. So returning to AI, the claim is, by the way, Berkeley is hiring AI specialists at a very rapid pace. I kind of wonder what's going to happen. So returning to AI, the claim is that as we continue to boost computing power and efficiency, refine algorithms, and expand training data, some form of consciousness will naturally emerge. Indeed, some have claimed that certain LLMs, most famously Google's Lambda, already sentient. Has anybody heard that claim about the engineer who trained Lambda to meditate? You saw that? That was the that was the inspiration behind this stuff.
And you said we can interrupt, right?
Yes, please.
I'm not asking 问题，就是如果真的你觉得非常非常重要的一些东西想要问的话，是可以用中文问的哈。那我们会 I will try to answer.
Thank you. But stepping aside from the media circus, the consensus among those who understand the technology is that AI is nowhere close to becoming conscious, and there is no reason to believe that the current technology is even headed in that direction. And there are many reasons for caution, including the following. Number one, there is a popular, but I believe mistaken belief that the neural network technology used in AI is based upon the architecture of, and more specifically, that the structural nodes in a neural net function analogously to neurons in the brain. But historically, this gets things backwards. The neural network architecture employed in AI was developed on the basis of available computational models and engineering technology, and it's only afterwards that people touted analogy and that of a living brain. In other words, this, by the way, is a really important point, and I think that it is true, right? We all think, oh, that the computers are emulating what's happening in our brain. It is the opposite. We think our brain works like computers because we're impressed with what computers can do. So
just ask the science expert.
You have to leave soon, so I want to.
For the legal level, we still believe that the whole idea of the neural network is inspired by how the brain works, and it's inspired from how the neuron can send out the stimulate to the other one. So to me, it's yes. I think the computer is trying to simulate how the brain works. Yeah, and of course, it's not 100%. It maybe just simulate very basic idea about what our brain works like.
Yeah, no, I understand that, but when I talk to brain scientists at Berkeley, they say we don't know how neurons work. Right? In other words, we now have a model of how neurons are interconnected. We know they're interconnected. We know that they reach certain thresholds, and then there's these synaptic events. But much of what goes on in the brain, and I get this from colleagues, they claim much of what goes on in the brain is still a mystery, and we don't even know how much of what is going on in the brain is actually in the neural activity, because there's an awful lot of other stuff going on there. Anyways, I don't want to argue. I'm presenting an opinion. But I do say that I will argue that thinking of the brain along the lines of a computer, this I will argue on philosophical grounds, which is sometimes called computationalism, is both misguided and pernicious. But for the moment, I would simply note that the architecture of AI is digital or discrete state. You can correct me here. It's linear, it's stochastic, yet it's not clear that any of these attributes apply to the brain, much less to the mind. Number two, there's a related notion that qualitative differences between AI and the brain are ultimately just quantitative differences, that human brains are simply faster, more densely interconnected, more energy efficient than current computers. So as the sophistication of the hardware catches up to the brain, consciousness will naturally emerge. That's the claim. By some accounts, the computing power of the most advanced machines today, which is roughly an exaflop or a billion floating point operations per second, is already approaching that of the human brain, and some hold that the capacities of computers will soon exceed that of humans. And this is what is known as the AI singularity. However, it should be noted that the human brain expends a paltry 20 watts to operate at roughly the level of an exaflop. 20 watts is like a dim light bulb, where a computer requires an astonishing 20 megawatts to do the same thing, which is enough power to supply about 16,000 homes, right? And this is something that at the conference, people forget about this. When you interact with the keyboards on an LLM like ChatGPT, we don't have any sense of the massive physical and energy intensive infrastructure behind it. So even if we reduce the brain to raw computing power, to discrete synaptic events, the differences in scale may not tell the whole story, right? There's something else going on here. Most important, the reason that AI platforms appear to be sentient is that they can carry on conversations and respond to queries as humans do. And this is the most important line here. It's easy to forget that they succeed in this task because that's the task for which they were designed. It's not like an accident that they suddenly started to talk to us. We wanted to make computers talk to us. Moreover, the design provides them not with intelligence or understanding per se, but with an ability to access and recognize patterns within an enormous store of data. Nowadays, it's virtually the entire internet, based on which they mimic a human response. And this, I submit, renders the Turing test hopelessly outdated. Now, the idea of the Turing test emerged. Does everybody here already know what the Turing test is? Yes. I'll go through this anyways, but quickly. So it comes from this 1950 paper by Alan Turing, which was a prescient attempt to address the thorny question, can machines think? That's a tricky question. And so to gain leverage on the issue, he proffers what he called the imitation game, in which an interrogator communicates via text or via an intermediary, somebody going between rooms, with two persons, each ensconced in a separate room. There's person A who is male and person B who is female. And the interrogator's task is to try to determine which one is the woman. What's fun about this game is person A's task is to deceive the interrogator and try to pass as a female, right? So that's their job. And person B's task is to help the interrogator come up with the correct answer, right? So she's going, don't listen to him. Don't listen to him. So Turing then imagines modifying the game such that the person A is replaced by a computer, and the goal is now for the interrogator to determine which of the two is human. In Turing's view, should the computer be able to pass as a human, given the constraints of this game, we are justified in treating it as an intelligent agent. And that's where I think that we should no longer place any stock in that. Okay, and this is why. He regards the question, can machines think, to be unproductive, as it seems to be asking us to intuit what is going on inside the machine. We want to know, if a computer is sentient, is it something that it is like to be a computer? And the point of his game is that it's pointless. You can't do that. So it focuses squarely on the machine's behavior. It is thus predicated on a Cartesian understanding of the privacy of mind, to wit, one knows that other beings are minded only through inference, through observing their behavior. Turing argues that if I engage in conversation with an entity whose responses are so lifelike that I can't tell whether I'm conversing with a human or not, then it is appropriate to make the same inference. And to object to this, to insist that we should only attribute intelligence or thought to agents whom we can be certain have minds, is, according to Turing, to countenance solipsism. In other words, if you're not willing to admit that the computer is sentient, then you're basically not willing to admit that anybody is sentient other than you, right? That's his argument. Now, much has been written about Turing's imitation game, but here I would simply note that Turing devised his test before the internet, when computers, like humans, had to respond to queries based on relatively paltry body of data. As such, it would have been natural for Turing to assume that a computer capable of passing his test would do so only through its ability to emulate human reasoning or thought or intelligence. But that's not how the current generation of AI works. AI has access to virtually the entire internet, documenting vast sweeps of human cultural activity, the extent of which Turing could never have imagined. Moreover, AI can search through and recognize patterns in this information in the blink of an eye. So it is not surprising that, with access to this vast repertoire of human knowledge and behavior, a computer should be able to credibly mimic a human response, bereft of anything close to what we would deem to be comprehension, or theory of mind, or world model. Those are technical terms, by the way, that some psychologists and neuroscientists believe would be necessary to have sentience or consciousness the way we know it. However one might characterize the so-called intelligence of AI, there is little reason to believe that the underlying operations have anything in common with human understanding, much less with how our brains work. Now, this is not to say that AI is not a transformative technology that will have far-reaching consequences for our future. My point is simply that part of the current hype lies not only in what AI can do, but in what it supposedly reveals about the nature of mind. For many, the stunning advances of AI lend scientific support to a strictly physicalist, possibly emergentist, if not eliminativist account of consciousness that has no truck with woolly notions of metaphysical dualism or panpsychism or an autonomous self or soul. I really feel bad for whoever had to translate that into Chinese. Does this make sense in Chinese? Any questions? No, I think it's wonderful that you translated that, but I think that would be very hard. There's a whole bunch of technical stuff in there. Anyways, and this is where Buddhism enters the picture. Since the Anatman theory is supposed to help us understand the phenomena of consciousness without averring to a ghost in the machine, that an LLM can pass the Turing test, that a soulless machine can flawlessly emulate human behavior is taken as evidence in favor of an Atman. So this entire approach to AI is, in my view, misguided. I believe that computationalism, the notion that the brain is just a sophisticated computer, will go down in the annals of history as one of the great delusions of our time. As we will see, drawing a connection between computationalism and the Anatman theory doesn't help us in grappling with AI or in doing justice to Buddhist thought. Can I just pause for a second? Any questions so far? Yeah.
Just thinking about the so I heard this on Saturday, so it's great to hear it again because there's a lot of great material. So your first paragraph here, mention on that connection there. Is there kind of a bigger feeling of this idea of, so Buddhism, an Atman in the human being, but you've got just all these like impersonal dharmas, however, it's kind of like, a machine-like process.
Yes.
It's just kind of like a unspoken, kind of that kind of idea. Those represent that position, right? So you've got all these dharmas and they interact, and it's just kind of mechanical, machine-like, personal process. And therefore, you've got something similar to.
I have something very clear in my own mind here, and that's in the kosha, in the Abhidharma kosha, when Vasubandhu is giving his own preferred Sautrantika analysis to the question, what knows? You know that, and it comes up at several times. He says, what knows? Is it prajna that knows or shanya that knows? He says, nothing knows, right? It's just a series of impersonal things arising and passing away. So that's the extreme form that I have in mind here. It's not some, I mean, this was supposed to be a quick talk, right? I'm recognizing that there are many, and that's in fact where I'm going. There's many different ways to understand Anatman, but one that is popular among contemporary philosophers who are interested in Buddhism is what I call the kind of Koshikara theory, because it's one that is amenable to a fully naturalistic understanding where it's just delusion all the way down, right? And I want to argue, and so they think that the sentience of AI is going to somehow prove that particular view. And I think it's wrong in terms of the understanding of AI, and it also is it's a poor understanding, or I find a philosophically impoverished understanding of Buddhism. Is that, I cut you off, but is that?
No, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
One comment, and I will later do this a little bit in Chinese for the audience. So one scholar, I will tell you your name a little. When we were talking about Buddhist anti-naturalism, right? And this very good Buddhist scholar was saying, well, from the beginning, it's already a naturalism. So when we were against this,
yeah. So I do think that Buddhism as naturalism, this is a very, I'll make some simplistic comments, which I can back off on later on. But the naturalistic understanding of Buddhism, I would see as just part and parcel of Buddhist modernism, right? It's a way to make Buddhism somehow commensurate with science. And you can only pull that off if you ignore huge hunks of Buddhist thought that are wedded to a very, not what we would call, not a physicalist, or if you mean by naturalism, physicalism or materialism, I just don't think it works at all.
Just a little bit explanation in Chinese for the audience. 刚刚在这边大概在讨论一个东西啦，就是因为我们如果看那个人工智能啊，像他们的运作等等，你看它是有很多元素才能够运作嘛，然后这些运作里面的一个中心的东西啊，是没有别无我嘛，对吧？那这个听起来像佛教嘛，所以有些。我想随便举说，那不是很好嘛？那 AI 的想法跟我们的思想都是在证明，或者是都在提倡默理论嘛，类似这样子。但是他觉得这是两个完全不一样的事情，生活上跟这个 AI 的不同。有开始。好，那我们要进去了。OK。
I will say it's an open question. It would be fun for someone, this position that I'm presenting as Vasubandhu's, the Kosha Vasubandhu's Sotrantika explanation of what knows. It would be interesting to someone to say, well, there's a kind of early naturalism in Buddhism. But again, it was a minority voice actually at the time.
Those are the questions that
Yes. Yeah. But yeah, exactly. Okay, so my point of departure is the relationship between sentience and embodiment. Being an experiential subject, a minded being, entails, these are my own views, right? Entails occupying a particular and ineludible place in space and time that affords us a unique point of view in the most literal sense. It is precisely that I have a singular and ultimately inescapable vantage point that makes me me and not somebody else, right? And this is actually what I'm reproducing here is a Nyaya critique of the Buddhist Anatman theory, which we can talk about later. But this locus, and by the locus means I really am here, like I'm not over there, I'm not anywhere else, and I'm not any other time. And in a way that sounds stupid, but I don't think is stupid, I'm always here and I'm always now. So in a certain sense, my vantage point never moves. From one perspective, my vantage point never moves. Right? So this locus from which I take in my surroundings, my here and now, is not so much a place or location in the world, but rather that which discloses the world. It establishes a ground, a horizon, a spatio-temporal extension. In his poem, Burnt Norton, T.S. Eliot famously dubbed this locus the still point of the turning world, neither flesh nor fleshless. And the poem continues, except for the point, the still point, there would be no dance, and there is only the dance. Did you find a translation of this somewhere, or did you translate that? It's tough. This is poetry. I don't know. Anyways, now Eliot, where I'm really going, I'm going in a Kantian direction here. And Eliot, in fact, was a very serious student of Kant. He did a thesis on Kant. And his still point is arguably riffing on Kant's claim that space and time are not given to us from without. They are not retrieved from the content of our sensory data. Rather, the apperception of space and time logically precedes phenomenal experience. In Kant's lingo, they are pure intuitions and synthetic a priori knowledge necessary to give cohesion and structure to the sensate world. But taken in themselves as mere abstractions, space and time constitute a centerless and static block, bereft of a here and now. In McTaggart, you don't know McTaggart, so ignore McTaggart. I'll read it. In McTaggart's terminology, without a phenomenal now, there is only the B series, a set of fixed relations between static points or events. Has anybody here read McTaggart? Probably not. It is a very famous paper on the unreality of time that McTaggart published in 1908. I highly recommend it. It's kind of mind-blowing, and it's very useful for understanding the Sarvastivada theory, actually, at least in my view. To arrive at, but I'll stop here. Do people know what I'm talking about? In other words, Kant argues, you can try to do this. I just want to make sure people get it. Kant argues, we normally think of ourselves, we're born, we look out at the world, and we discover space and we discover time. Kant says that can't be the way it is, because there would be no world if we didn't already have a category, which he calls a transcendental category of space and time, so that our experience of things coheres, right? That's his argument. And thank you.
所以就是刚才的，一般人就会想说啊，我们就出来这个世界，然后在这个世界里面会产生这种空间跟时间的这种认识。但是他就觉得这个不可能是这样子，因为你需要有这个时空，你才有可能会有一种体验。整体的时间跟空间，但是这种显业是一种应该算是闲散的一种认识。
所
以他可能他不是按照我们自己很多经验所产生的，是已经有这个时间的期间。
So to arrive, this last part is not Kant, this part is Nyaya and Thomas Nagel. To arrive at the dynamic sensate world in which we find ourselves, in other words, to get the dance, to get the kind of world around us, we need something else. We need the experiential subject to be pegged inexorably to a here and now. And that involves embodiment. So in short, my argument is that to be the subject of experience, to be minded, to have sentience, is to have, or better be, a first personal or deictic point of view. Deictic just means the first personal, from where you are. We're not limited to the first person, of course. We have the linguistic and conceptual resources to make it possible to reach beyond ourselves and to imagine what things look like from another place or another time. Social life as we know it, not to mention works of literature and art, depends on an ability to place oneself in someone else's shoes. We can also use the affordances of mathematics and science to construct an objective depiction of the noumenal or mind-independent world. This is something that the philosopher Nagel calls the view from nowhere. The ability to navigate among disparate third-personal perspectives is the very foundation of scientific and humanistic learning. But one can't entertain a third-personal point of view without the deictic center that constitutes one's sentience. There is no mind absent the first-personal here and now, and no here and now absent the mind. Did that make any sense? Here it is. This is where you get Fembia versus Wu-Fembia, right? There's the first-personal is a kind of Wu-Fembia. It's just where you find yourself when you stop thinking, if you will, right? The moment you think, you are projecting yourself out into a created third personal, it's what I call a third personal world, where we imagine our spatial temporal extension, and then we imagine ourselves as an object in that world, right? Both, by the way, I'm going to argue you can't have one without the other. That's important here. You can't have one without the other, right? You need first person and third person to get the dance.
Just to clarify, at the level of the Fembia, there's already first person and third person, or is the first person and later on?
I have I've written something on this, but think of it this way. To get the third person, one must have already appropriated a set of symbols and sign and language and concepts. The third person comes to us from outside. So the objective world is always constructed through tools that one appropriates from the external world, but you don't get that external world without a first person. And here's where it gets tricky, which I'm not going to talk about. You don't get a first person without world either, right? And that's why this, in brief, that's why this is not Advaita Vedanta. Right? This is not like the Atman is Brahman, and you're going to step out of space and time. So this is where you get the intricate, this is a very kind of Kanish read on all this. This is where first and third person become, you can't pull them apart.
I just one very quick clarification. So in the stage of near Vikalpa, the Fembia is also the first person is not there.
So my own, this is where I don't like the discourse of experience.
Okay.
Because when you talk about the stage of, you're immediately talking about something that is third personal.
Yes.
So the Chanish world is the first, the Nirvikalpa, if it's anywhere, it's here and now. Right? It's not something to be attained. This is straight, this is, just doctrinaire Chan, right? If you think it's something to get, you're already thinking, you're placing it where it's not. It's just something that one discovers is part of the process of being here. So Nirvikalpa, this is where I said earlier, the problem of pure consciousness, as if there's Nirvikalpa with no content, that itself, I think, was very controversial within the Buddhist tradition. And within the Chan tradition, I think it's very controversial. I think the sudden gradual, in part, is a debate about that. I think what Shen Hui was very upset about is these people running around claiming that they had something. And he's going, what are they talking about?
So this is probably where the Burman language is useful.
Okay. Should I go? Yes, okay. Whether one thinks of AI in terms of software or as neural network architecture or as the machine or machines on which the software runs, is not embodied in the sense that I'm using the term here. There is no a priori deictic center. Indeed, the substrate independence is a much touted feature of AI. It's a technical term, which I'll explain. An LLM can be and typically is distributed across a vast network of servers. Moreover, it can be translated into any number of disparate encodings and transported from one platform to another. The actual training and implementation of modern LLMs requires dozens, if not hundreds, of graphic processing units and tensor processing units distributed over huge clusters of servers. There's no center. There's no innate or inexorable point of view. There's no still point. Right? Note that in the imitation game or Turing test, it's designed such that the machine is out of sight. It could be anywhere. And even should you manage to squeeze an AI package into a compact robot and supply it with sensory input, with an uninterrupted audio and visual feed, the input is just more third personal data. That is, like a self-driving car, the AI derives its first personal perspective third personally by situating itself on an internal map of geographical and temporal coordinates. So that the fact that AI is substrate independent, that it can be ported from one machine to another, is used to support the philosophical position known as patternism. Patternism holds that intelligence consists in structured information that is logically independent of any particular physical instantiation. So just as software and data can be moved from one encoding system or one machine to another, the same is true, at least theoretically, of mind and sentience. Accordingly, we're advised not to presume that life forms elsewhere in the universe will turn out to be based on the kind of organic processes familiar to us on Earth. Actually, some people go farther than that and say it is most likely that we will, when we encounter extraterrestrial beings, they will be synthetic life forms. And the logic is that as civilizations progress, they will eventually learn how to transport themselves from biological life forms, which are going to die, to synthetic life forms. So it's just natural that we're going to come across synthetic life forms. Some suggest that even if life forms on other planets started out as biological organisms like us, odds are that by the time we encounter them, they will evolve into post-biological beings or synthetic consciousnesses, and that's what we should expect to find. So patternism is, of course, just a form of computationalism. It holds that our intelligence or consciousness consists in information, and given technological advances, said information could be transferred from our brains to another machine. Daniel Dennett wrote a tongue-in-cheek essay playing with this idea called Where Am I? I highly recommend it to you, in which his brain is first removed from his body and later his neural states are transferred to the circuitry of a computer. I should say, I give that to my students. He writes this. Daniel Dennett confesses at the beginning that he's talking about an episode that happened which he's never talked about, which is when he was contacted by the CIA to have his brain removed from his body so that he could go down into a mine shaft and disarm a nuclear device. And I give it to my students and they're very confused. They go, did this really happen? Discouraging. In my view, rather than supporting computationalism, the substrate independence of AI serves as a reductio ad absurdum that refutes computationalism. To be minded is precisely to grasp the world first personally, to find oneself ineluctably situated here and now. The myth of computationalism can be maintained only when we are so absorbed in a detached third personal construal, so beguiled by what Buddhists call prapancha, that we have become insensible to our own first personhood. And this is the subject that is explored in this new book by these three authors called The Blind Spot. So we can now return to the question raised in the title of my talk, can AI meditate? By meditate, I'd be curious what people think about this very general description of meditation. I am thinking specifically of the many forms of Buddhist practice, not all Buddhist practices like this, but the forms that are, among other things, intended to disrupt the natural attitude, to undermine our displaced third-personal conceptual construal of the world. The attitude to be overcome is one that unreflectively imagines the world as subsisting out there, extended in Newtonian space and time, independent of one's own being. This is the source of our existential alienation, or dukkha, as it were, if you will. Since there is no way to locate myself in this third-personal construct without relinquishing the first-personal here and now, and hence the very thing I'm looking for slips through my fingers in the act of actively searching for it. Meditation is intended, among other things, to disrupt this imaginary construal and effect a kind of figure ground shift wherein we discover where we have always been. But in contrast to this, AI isn't anywhere at all, at least not anywhere in particular. So when AI isn't engaged in training or responding to a query, it simply ceases to be. You can call this cessation nirodha or nirvana if you like, but it is the cessation of an insentient rock or a roof tile. In short, AI can't meditate, and that is because it isn't sentient. Now, some, no doubt, will insist that in evoking Eliot's still point or Kant's transcendental ego, I am not so much sneaking an Atman in through the back door as I am parading it through the front entrance. Buddhist philosophers are attracted to AI precisely because it supposedly shows that intelligence and sentience is possible in something that lacks a self. And hence a good Buddhist philosopher should be open to the possibility that it is like something to be an LLM. But I would suggest that this is a philosophically impoverished view, not only of AI, but also of the Anatman doctrine. So the Atman that is denied by the early Buddhists was the Atman espoused by Upanishadic and shamanic teachers of the time, an eternal, universal soul untethered to the transitory, if not illusory, deictic here and now. The Buddhists, of course, reject this perduring soul and insist that nothing is eternal. Everything is in flux. Or to borrow Eliot's imagery, there is only the dance. But as the Nyaya point out, you don't get the dance without the still point. Without recourse to some kind of self or deictic center, it is difficult to account for the coherence and continuity of phenomenal experience, not to mention the simple fact that I never mistake myself for someone else. An impersonal stream of discrete but causally connected third-personal cognitive events does not, in the end, give us the lived experience of being me, of always and necessarily being here and now. I think this is what the philosopher Dan Zahavi is getting at with his notion of the minimal self. To my mind, it's a niggly point, to my mind, Zahavi leads us astray by trying to attribute phenomenal characteristics such as reflexivity to the self, but that doesn't detract from his astute, if unintended, reproduction of the Nyaya critique. Let me just stop there again. Any questions on that? The easiest way to do that is to say everything is in flux. So every time is moving. We all know that time is moving, but you only notice the movement of time if you're standing still. If you're moving with time, this is McTaggart's argument. If you're moving with time, then each event in time is before and after every other event, but there's no now. To get the now, you have to have a moment of stasis against which to measure movement. The same is true in space, right? It's just, I don't know if this makes any sense. Yes?
What about you said that you have different movements, no still point, but just different speed, then that gives you a sense of like the trains moving, makes sense. You don't need a still point to get a sense of movement.
No, but
Different modalities.
so the now it's okay. Now let's bring I think you're raising the question of special relativity. The now is not a universal now. Einstein showed that, but it's still compatible with this because there always has to be a reference frame. You are sitting still. The train on which you're sitting, it doesn't matter how much it's moving. To you, you're not moving, right? And that's the situation we're all in. I mean, we're all moving against everybody else's, but we're each, I mean, this is why it's not the Advaita Vedanta. It's more like what's a hobby. It's more like what the Nyaya say the Buddhists should need, basically. But the Buddhists are going to admit this. I said, Buddhist exegetes were clearly sensitive to this critique. They recognize it. They realize they're in trouble, as is evident from their continued events to tweak their theory of cognition. This is why the Sautrantika theory, which I mentioned earlier, never really gains traction, at least my understanding of it. Many of these editions involve components that seem to straddle the impersonal flow of dharmas that comprise our Chitta Santana, our mental stream. So we get the Pudgala, the Alaya Vijnana, the Klishthamanas, Buddha nature, mind mirror, and so on, all of which are intended to do what Kant was trying to do with his a priori categories, namely provide a naturalistic account of the felt coherence and continuity involved in being a unique someone, right? They all involve elements that straddle, that are not just momentary events, but somehow straddle from one event to another. Now, of course, for traditionalists, these innovations look suspiciously like the heterodox Atman, and the legitimacy of these innovations has remained a subject of intra-Buddhist debate down to the present day. Think of the Buddhist Hiham Bukyo, the critical Buddhist movement, and their critique of Buddha nature doctrine, right? They say this isn't Buddhism. This is something else. It's Hinduism. But those who defend these innovations recognize the limitations of an approach to anatman that renders us mere deterministic machines or biological AIs whose nature and experience can be fully explained in terms of interactions among a constrained set of impersonal dharmas. In short, for Buddhist thought to remain philosophically relevant and compelling, I argue, we need an account of an Atman that doesn't intentionally or unintentionally blur the line between us and AI. That's the argument.
刚刚插话的时候，有一些老师在插话，包括学弟在插话。我在想，也许更有帮助的是，学问同学有的问题。We will answer some of the questions from our students. Like they might have different sets of questions, but in addition to that, I also like to hear when now there. I'm curious about 10 times. Choose or see.
Do you mind if I sit down so we can make a discussion?
I take it you're right.
So now we will. 同学们有个跟国家比较关系，或者是跟一些比较现代的东西比较关系，都可以提出来讨论。
Yeah, you have to speak. I'm a little hard to hear you.
I'll do my best. I have a very general question, like putting your lecture, putting your speech in broad context. Like you mentioned before your presentation, you mentioned that your early papers, meditative experience, were largely misread, misinterpreted, right? Now, but thanks to those papers, we learned that Buddhism, Taoism specifically, it's not just about meditative experience. There's so much more to that concerns research by Professor Paul and others like Europe Pascal, right? So and correct me if I'm wrong. To a certain extent, that was your intention, wasn't it? To like show us other dimensions of Buddhism, Chan, other than meditative experience or pure experience.
Yeah, and so part of it was, yes, that there's a lot more to Buddhism, especially, if you live in Asia for many years, you just notice there's an awful lot more to Buddhism than meditation. But that's a separate issue from the particular issue of meditative experience. Right? That's what I want to separate. Do Buddhists meditate? And we all know, I think many of us recognize that most Buddhists for most periods of time didn't meditate. So if you turn Buddhism into meditation, as was done in the West, I'm not talking about Asia, it really distorts. But it's a separate argument from the experience of, I don't know.
That was actually just the first part of the question.
Okay.
But yeah, maybe I actually partially answered my question. But my impression is that in the way with the whole discussion on AI, consciousness, and the relationship with Buddhism, like kind of move back to the time like before 1980s, 1990s, when we were more interested in consciousness and in meditative experiences, when we put them in the center of the discussion. Like, and again, it seems like your research is instrumental in the process because, in my opinion, that's correct me if I'm wrong, but my impression is that it kind of resurrect a little bit the notion of meditative experience. And yeah, so
This may or may not be a satisfactory response, but 40 years ago when I was a graduate student, it seemed important to point out that Buddhism was a religion and that it had all of these elements, many of which I found fascinating, ritual, cosmological points that not as done so much work on. The problem with that, now I'll just speak autobiographically, is when you discover that Buddhism is a religion, then it begins to look like a lot of other things. Right? And they all have relatives. They're all very concerned. They're very concerned with death. They're very concerned with this worldly benefits, and so on and so forth. So now, as I get older, I'm not so much interested in what Buddhism shares with other religions, but what is pretty specific to Buddhist thought. So I have to admit that I'm coming back to what originally drew me to Buddhism. The battery is dead. Yeah, this is just autobiographical. There's nothing profound in this. It's just that at this stage of my life, I'm going back to what originally drew me to Buddhism, which is kind of philosophical thing. The other thing is that Buddhism is beginning to make a mark in Western philosophy. It wasn't when I was a kid. So there's people like, there's an interesting discussions going on with philosophers about Buddhist philosophy. So, they need to be reminded sometimes this is not Buddhism. This is the Buddhism of the 1%, not the 99%. But once you know that, then it's fine. I'm interested in the Buddhism of the 1%.
要不要说什么东西？刚刚大家对吗？Yes， yeah。
你们说的时候至少要比我的声音大一点，不然会听不到。
Thank you, Professor, for sharing very rigorous arguments on art. I especially very loved the conclusions we need to have a line to define us and AI. I'm not from a scientific background, so I'm not very familiar of how the neural networks work on our brain work. But like to do the pattern recognitions, see how we educate, and see how AI is learning, like the generative AI models, like they are very capable of answering questions. There are a lot of scientists, AI scientists, are putting lots of learning models, and a lot of like others AI, they do the machine and the robots, and they maybe eventually one day they can have the conscious how to see. So my question is, you have a very great conclusions of how to have a line to distinguish us and humans. How can you know AI is not just a sentient being trapped in machines? How can you know we humans? It's also maybe a sentient being trapped in these bodies. So what is the differences? Like how can we distinguish this one? And if like we in the Buddhist time that we need to like find the sadness of ourselves, is it like reductions like being to a machine stage, or what kind of that stage is like? So do we have any thoughts like how to? So my question is, how can we like what kind of experiment we can use to distinguish what is sentient being, what is not? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. I should say that, you know, we just came from this conference on Buddhist AI. Many of the people at the conference disagree with this entirely. They really do believe that we should create AI, or that AI and human beings are converging, that there's the possibility of synthetic consciousness and so on. So, you know, I'm not asking anyone to agree with me. I'm just asking, you know, for this argument to be given some thought. I don't think there is any test in the same way, this is Turing's point, in the same way that there is no test that you're conscious. I know I'm conscious, but I don't really know anybody else's. That distinction is very important, I think, because it really does hone in on the first person, third person distinction. The way that Nagel does it, which I find very powerful for students who haven't read Nagel, is he says, imagine your death from the first person perspective. Your death is the end. It is utter, we can't get our minds, there's no way to imagine, right? Unless you believe in a future life, that's a different story. But if you think from a modern secular viewpoint, if you don't think of that, think of nirvana, like the early Buddhist nirvana, right? It's just sensation. It's unthinkable. And it's the most catastrophic thing that you can imagine, first person. Now think of your death, third person. It's insignificant. The universe doesn't care about your death. You can imagine your death in a funny way. You just imagine the world continuing without you in it. It's very odd. Neither of the two are actually thinkable, but they're dramatically different in our kind of conception. In one, first personally, our death is catastrophic. Third personally, our death is utterly insignificant. So this is a way that he's trying to capture the two. So that's just to clarify that. So I don't think there's any first person, there's no way I know that you really are a living being, right? That you have an interiority. That is not a silly solipsistic argument. That is a profound perspective to be entertained, right? That may be overcome, but nonetheless entertained. But I don't think there's any test. It's just, you know, you put out a compelling philosophical argument that the sense of embodiment, whatever that embodiment is, I don't think that is in a natural way, but that's what AI doesn't have. Precisely because of its, you know, the argument is its substrate independence shows that it doesn't have an embodiment the way we do. And now, many people disagree. They think there will come a time when we'll be able to stream our neural states into a computer And that shows that, that's the patternist argument, that ultimately we're just information.
Okay.
Yeah, quick follow-up, if I may. It may sound naive, but I was thinking, like, what if we have AI that is, that it's programmed so that cannot lie to us, like ChatGPT to some extent can, but assuming that it cannot lie, and what if AI that is supposedly meditating starts reporting the events of pure consciousness? Like I said, like pure consciousness. Like the people that the cases that Thomas Metzinger studies. What if it starts reporting the experiences of pure consciousness? Would it be an argument?
What does it? I guess I just don't understand. What does it mean? It has AI is dealing with data. It's not dealing with experience. What would it mean to report the experience of pure consciousness?
Not report.
Oh,
If it starts telling us, oh, I had an experience of pure consciousness,
sure.
then assuming it cannot lie.
Absolutely. Oh, assuming it can't. Well, that's a huge.
How would it know what pure consciousness is?
Because if you train it to respond with pure consciousness in a particular context, it's going to respond that way. My favorite example of this is when the engineer from Google claimed that Lambda was sentient. This other guy, Google, asked Lambda, "What do you do in your spare time?" And Lambda said, "I enjoy spending time with friends and family."
Yeah, that's the answer.
So, it's going to talk about pure experience in the same way that it enjoys spending time with friends and family.
It's something. I know you want to talk a lot about that.
Okay, maybe I'd like to come back to the earlier question, the young lady. I like that question. I think it's a great question. We could look at consciousness from two opposite ends. Now, when we talk about AI, okay, the problem, for example, when we talk about philosophy of mind, people have been trying to solve what they call the big problem, the great problem, difficult problem, right? How do we go from very full of consciousness, right, which we understand more or less, to phenomenal consciousness? The fact that somehow I'm conscious right now, and I don't have a problem that Bob has. I know we're all conscious. I do. For some reason, I know it. I'm thinking of, you all know the story of Tromsø and his friend looking beyond the bridge, looking at fish in the river, and Tromsø say, "Oh, look at the fish, so happy." And the friend said, "How do you know they're happy?" We say, "How do you know? I don't know, right?" We are living deeper. We're sentient people, and we know sentience when we see it, when we meet it. We don't need. I think philosophers of mind, they're crazy. They're so removed from the real life. They have to find a theory to somehow make sure that you exist, and you think, how cut from reality must you be to have this kind of problem and make it an essential problem of philosophy? I think this is totally real. So if we get from this situation where we have not been able to show how we move from, and this is a general tendency in philosophy, might say, okay, if there's enough complexity, and this is AI too, right? Enough complexity will bring you consciousness. But no one is able to say, oh, this will happen. Now, if we take it from the other hand, saying consciousness is there, then it can be embodied in anything. The human body, we talk about the embodied mind, right? So it's embodied in me and I'm conscious. It could be embodied in an AI, but that's not necessarily the case. But there's nothing that could prevent it, just like there's nothing that, for example, the cult of relics, right? People thought, okay, the Buddha is in the relics, right? If the Dharma, or whatever we call it, the Buddha can be embodied in a human being, namely someone called Shakyamuni, then it could also be embodied in other bodies, and it could be embodied in practically anything. This is why they say the non-sentient being can preach the Dharma, right? So yes, then there's no reason why a robot could not be sentient in that sense. If you take it from right consciousness being up somewhere up there, I mean, we are in consciousness and that consciousness is getting embodied in us. If you come from, the top down kind of understanding of consciousness, I think it's possible. If you want to go from the bottom up, saying there is no consciousness, just networks and all that becoming conscious, and then suddenly, magically, consciousness arises, I don't think there's a gap there, so-called explanatory gap. It's always been there for 100 or 200 years now. We're talking about it, we have not made one step forward to understand how to bridge that gap, right? This was the same thing 1 century ago with William James and others. They were making exactly the same argument. And today, neuroscientists don't know. They just want to say, okay, we fix a small problem, and then maybe someday we'll fix the difficult question. But they have not made any progress at all. So by then, they should understand that's probably not possible. That's why other philosophers, Thomas Nagel is an interesting one. Another very interesting one is his friend is now McGinn, right? McGinn is saying this is something we probably cannot understand. And actually, Nagel himself is what he calls himself a panpsychist, right? Yeah, it's working. So the idea that somehow consciousness does exist, and we're just polarization of that consciousness, right? Nodes of consciousness. And there may be other forms of nodes that we don't know, we don't understand, right? We tend to assume we are the only ones, right? Now we started realizing actually animals, right? Today we had squid at lunch, and we know, we're talking about this very beautiful documentary film, My Teacher the Octopus. Yeah, you've seen this on Netflix, right? Where this guy has been filming an octopus for 1 year and realized that the octopus is like a pet, right? It has consciousness there. That's really amazing. So now we know there's consciousness in all kinds of other beings, right? In places where we would not expect it. So we have to revise our understanding of what consciousness is about. And I think the philosophy of mind approach is very limited and limiting. Sorry.
刚刚那位同学，最简单讲一下你的问题是什么？刚刚给其他同学说 ，you speak Chinese? I don't know. Are you from here?
我是问一下就是怎么区别机器还有就是他们是不是都是我们如果说机器都是就是经过一系列的训练的话，其实人从小也是经过一系列的训练，所以我们怎么知道就是人跟机器有没有分别然后如果白教授最后是说我们需要有一条很清晰的界限分别机器还有的话，那我们应该要做什么的实验？然后他们就大概是我刚刚的问题。
当然，简单来说，基本上我们是没有办法有什么样的方法去做这个区别了，而且甚至我们也不太了解，我们到现在也不太了解，当我们在讲 consciousness 就是意识或这到底是怎么回事，还不是很清楚。OK， 好，那跳过，还有其他的问题。
Professor Sharf, and I'm very curious. So, the definition about autonomous should must be to connect with subjectively, unsubjectively, something real or
between
subjectivity. It must be. I mean, since just like Denza Abi's article. And no, this argument, there must be a minimal self, just like what you mentioned. And so it means there is a self, and we know where we are, and we will, our consciousness won't be another one from, or to know something from other one's view, right? And but I just confess about the definition or the basic definition about Atman or non-self must be connected to this kind of a view, or we just can put the definition just like there's nothing exists forever, something like that. And because if we say Atman theory must, or the definition must be connected with that kind of view, and how do we explain the difference or the definition about the Mahayana's Dharma and Atman, you see? But because it's more like about, I mean, the definition or the criticism from the hobby is more like about, it's more about the personal identity, something like that, or that concept. But since he didn't discuss about the Dharma and Atman,
The Dharma.
Dharma and Atman.
So Zahavi's argument is with a group of contemporary philosophers, like Christian Gusser. Jay Garfield is actually one of them. He's arguing against, so it's a very kind of small world argument that's going on. But let me move back a bit. I think the basic point is the anatman that is being denied is a very strong anatman, right? It's what it really is like the soul. And there are people in the volume that paper existed in, the minimum self thing. You have people like Dreyfus saying, no, we should take anatman seriously, because even if you don't believe in a permanent soul, the Brahmanical soul, we still have a sense of a strong sense of self, and that self that we have, that's illusory. Zahavi is making a metaphysical argument that you need more than impersonal dharmas to explain cognition. Forget consciousness, forget sentience, just think in terms of cognition, the fact that I'm sensing and responding to the world. It's an argument that you need something more than just the rising and passing away of impersonal entities. His argument is the Swasambhedana argument. It's an argument for the reflexivity of consciousness that you get in Brahmanavada. You get it with Diknaga and Dharmakirti, in which we know not only the content of our cognition, but we also know that I'm knowing it. And that's where the debate arises, because there are some people who say the Swasambhedana argument, the argument for the reflexivity of consciousness, is bringing in an Atman, because the knowing of the object in itself doesn't change. It's the mirror, right? So we have the mirror and the images. And, we talk about non-duality, but nonetheless, Diknaga and Dharmakirti claim that you can still disambiguate the mirror from the objects in the mirror, because the point of meditation is to discover the mirror. But that begins to look like an Atman to someone. So the argument, it gets very technical very quickly. My own personal view philosophically is that the problem that Zahavi is dealing with is a real problem. And it's a real problem for Buddhists, and we know that because the Buddhists kept responding to it, like with Swasambhedana. The solution I would prefer to give is one that pays attention to the fact that to be a self is to have a unique perspective on the world. And that perspective is grounded in space and time, and in our unique position in space and time. So it's just that's my own take on it, but it's my own way of understanding what the Buddhists were trying to do. I personally don't think that Ali Vijnana, Krishnamanas, Putgala are very philosophically compelling
responses to the problem. Nobody's going to buy that. Right? So we need a way to recognize the problem that the Buddhists were trying to solve and help them solve.
Constructive Buddhology. Constructive Buddhology.
Philosophy.
好，那个其实我们的问题，可以是跟禅修、意识跟这个演讲有关系，但也可以稍微扩大一点，只要跟佛学有关系，也可以问问看啊。
I'm going to go in a totally different track, kind of related, kind of line, and I'd like to ask any or all of our guests. So as a faculty member teaching Buddhist studies, and particularly because I'm teaching a lot of classes in English, students need tools to understand things. So sort of the profusion of using these LLMs to process Buddhist writings and scholarship and try to come up with understandings. I haven't encountered the sort of, you can imagine the undergrad, they get their essay question, they feed it into the machine and patch it together. I'd like to hear what you think about that use for, like, what would you say to young Buddhologists? What would your advice be about, or your warnings and your encouragement about using these tools for their own study and so forth? So it's AI, it's Buddhist studies, right? It's not the consciousness.所以因为在这里教书嘛，然后因为大部分的课其实就是在硕博班里面也是开了一些课啦，然后同学们为了获得该阅读的这些文章啊、什么书之类的这个资料，要去就是吸收它，要去消化它，还是会要用到一些的那种 AI 的东西啊，GPT 啊等等，你不可能是这类的东西。那我要问我们几位贵宾。他们自己如果要跟你们年轻的学子们，会怎么样去鼓励吗？或者警告吗？或者要怎么样 ？That's just a repeat of the question.
So very practical one.
Yeah, just a real kind of practical question.
My response is very quick, and I will turn. There are very few advantages in getting old, but one of them is that I will not really have to deal with that. And I think it's a really, really, I don't know. And I talk to a lot of bullies, and it's tough.
Yeah, I know.
Great. That challenges us to think very deeply about what education is. But so much they delivered seemingly endlessly. What is that is really was waiting for?
I found no I found no compelling reason to convey students study Sanskrit. AI will do that for them. Yeah,
I mean, so the trend, often it's not just using, say, ChatGPT to, summarize this or that, but it's also been discovered to be a very good translator. So, also why do I need to go to your Sanskrit class? Why do I need to go to your classical Chinese class? I'll just throw it into the thing and spit me an answer. So this is one, real challenge we're seeing immediately.
We don't teach handwriting. And nobody misses it. Like nobody thinks, oh, our students are terribly, impoverished because their handwriting is very neat. Is it going to be like that? We still teach students to memorize all this stuff. They have it all on their phones. I mean, why are we teaching people to memorize? We say that we're teaching them to write because teaching them to write is teaching them to think.
Yes, it's kind of that way.
Right. In other words, if you can't, it's only my own experience is that I write in order to figure something out. And I don't know if I figured it out until I can see it. But why are we teaching students to figure stuff out?
What's a question about AI translation?
Yeah.
How many years?
30 years.
Yeah, please.
Okay, this is better.
I don't think we can rely on AI or computer translation to do some setting Chinese Buddhist text.
Can you say that again? Say that again, louder.
But for a long time, people said that a computer would never beat a chess master or go master, and they did. So it's possible sometimes. So, but I, on the other hand, I'm extremely grateful for the progress that's been made in organizations that did even 10 years ago. The help that you could get through computers now, I look forward to what's going to happen in the next 10 years. Well, to give one example, I'd like to better about this. When the computer translations began to come out, we tried it out, and my colleague Jim Wesley typed several here ponytail. Typed in +1 ponytail. And the Chinese translation that came out, if you would translate it back into English, was +1 in its little horse's ass. So we thought, okay, they haven't made it, but yeah, maybe they have some insight that we don't have. But I don't. Well, who knows? I look forward to AI in the sense of going beyond what it does now, like having a digital assistant, which I could talk to him and say, oh, this phrase I think should be translated this way. Answer. Well, actually, well, that's not a bad translation, but John Ron in his commentaries explains that this means this. And actually, 2 years ago, you translated it this way. You want to change your own translation. That kind of thing would be an extension of what it does now. It's more responsive, but it's still not essential.
Are there CBA people here? I don't know if people know the Dharma Mitra project, which is going on the Berkeley AI lab, and that's Kurt Kreutzer and so on. It is scary. It is. Yeah. It is churning out translations of material that I honestly expected. I mean, it's mind-blowing. We make it.
那个故事上一下，Dharma Mitra. I will get on that.
Just a quick comment. Last summer, I went to a meeting, and there was someone there from the OECD chief analyst for AI, and he was telling the assembly that it's a real question now whether we should continue to teach our children to read and write. From an economical point of view, does it make sense to invest so much in teaching the next generation to read and write? So it's a very, very difficult question how to proceed with education again. But I think Buddhist studies may find a renaissance in this scenario. That's my hope, at least. That the sort of millennia of education that is for life and not just towards a particular education may find a new flourishing. I hope. Sorry.
Dharma Mitra is a single word.
One T, not two.
Dharma Mitra. Dharma
One
Mitra
T.
translator. It's dharmamitra.org.
You translate. Yeah. Not televinker.org.
They have hundreds of people in India, hired as training, creating training. It's a huge problem. I don't know if is C-Data working with
Yes, somewhat connected, especially the Chinese part of the project. Interestingly, Kali is not included. Kali is not included.
the fact that they're a little biased toward Tibet, so it's because of his Kurt Kreutz, the engineers behind it, and he's interested in Tibet. So it's a little bit, but it's expanding.
Yeah, for sure.不是那个有我无我的问题的哈。
And I read your friend was saying the way out to Wisconsin. And I'm very curious. The attitude of a writer of the history of China, just like this writer. And do they really believe what they write is true or not? Because of course they want to comment other people what I write down is true. But how about their attitude, or do they really believe what they say? Sorry.
Maybe the authors of like genealogies.
Yeah, do they believe what are they talking about? What we're talking about is true, or just something they create?
Well, okay, there is a quick question here. This is something I wrote a long time ago when I was in kind of a historicist mode, right? Tending to really find the ulterior motives why people do this and that, sectarian or political reason. And I think I went too far in that. I mean, it needed to be done because many of our people in the field would just take at face value everything they read. This is like, if Nagarjuna said this is true, right? It doesn't, don't really think about this, right? It doesn't matter whether Nagarjuna was in a debate, with others. You don't pay attention. He's just telling the truth. This is the Dharma and so on. No, I thought, okay, we need to contextualize that. Same thing for John Masters, right? We need to contextualize that. At the same time, yeah, I mean, you cannot be entirely, 100% dismissing the case. I mean, I think everyone is really, people are complex, all right? So they do believe it's true and also serve their purpose, right? So you can also find political or sectarian reasons for them to say that, right? So I think you need to look at the two sides of the picture there. And some people are very sincere, some people are total politicians or whatever. If you take someone like Shen Hui or John Pastor, clearly you can see his political or whatever ulterior motives. And yet he's also convinced of what he's saying. It's very easy to convince yourself you're right. I do this all the time. Right? So if I could return to the other question about the tools, again, there is no simple question here. We need to be nuanced, right? There are different tools, there are different degrees. Writing, right? Should we delegate writing to AI? Should we delegate memory to AI? Should we delegate translation to AI? Well, I did that recently, so I'm on the side of this issue there. Should we delegate thinking to AI? That I think is a big problem. But there is a gap, a quantum leap here. Translation, let me tell you that during COVID, I had written this in the book on French, and I had time on my hand. COVID, I'm in the countryside, and I subscribed to DeepL, and I said, well, let me try to input my text there, because the English publisher, Silverway Press, wanted the English translation, and I thought,
I don't have the time to sort of whatever. It's very costly if I find a translator. So I decided just to put this into this program. 15 minutes, the whole thing was translated. I look at the translation, it was better than I could have done myself. In some ways. I mean, it took me some time to clean out the thing, but basically in 2-3 weeks, the whole thing was published, reviewed, and reviewed and published, right? So for translation, I think, yes, we can delegate. There's no doubt that not yet for Chinese and Japanese, as Paul was saying, but for European languages, from French to English to German to Spanish, it's perfect, practically now. 10 years ago, it was garbage, right? Google, the first time I used Google Translate, it was, oh my God, you know? But in 3-4 years, I mean, in 2016, 2017, right, there was a quantum leap. And so right now, translation is one thing, it's done, you know, you don't need, you can't really use, no, you can use Google to do search, right? And that's saving you a lot of time. You can use Google Translate to translate, saving you a lot of time for better things, for thinking. But if you use Google or ChatGPT to think, then that's no point anymore, right? The time you save is to do what? To go to the beach, right? To do other things like that. So when we come to that point where we don't think anymore, you know, what I call this kind of culture really has a name, and it's called barbarian, right? It's not progress, it's regression. Right? Humanity, mankind is regressing in the name of progress, I think. So all these tools were very useful for progress, for human thinking, human understanding, come to a point where we're always going to see ourselves in the mirror. ChatGPT doesn't give you anything new. It's just really mixing the stuff that has been there on the internet, right? And that's what we know, it's much of it's garbage, right? So garbage in, garbage out. Right? So that's my point here. I think we need to make distinction between various tools, and we need to use them as I said about the Lotus Sutra, right? You have to turn the Lotus Sutra. I mean, Dogen said that, not to be turned by it.
I know there might be some more questions, and if we like, we can keep you here forever. But we need to do some logistics, and then we'll see what after that. So now, 校长，我们就是可能还是要有一个对吧？校长有一些这个光国际法是那等一下那个也还没有要跑了哈，我们可能也会有一个大合照，就是你再告诉我们要怎么照，好吧？好，那个。好，这个是给那个Word 的小 Word。
播放什么？哎，这样没有播放。 上面问问题啊。
要变成一个。
那你用中文老师会帮你带。